Hello, welcome. This stream is for me to talk through a way to start using Scrum visual that I created the other week. Why did I create it? Well, it was requested several times by students who attend my classes, and it's how I explain the Scrum framework. Because the Scrum Guide doesn't really talk about how to start using it; it just kind of talks about the state that is Scrum. But there's a few things we need to line up before we get going, and then once we're doing it, there's a few things we want to make sure happen as a result. So creating the visual was my way of trying to capture that. So it's my visual aid for a way, importantly, a way to get started. And how to use it? Well, you can use it as a reference if you want to start using Scrum. You can use it as a check-in to see, hey, did we cover all our bases as we did get started? Or you can use it to teach others or talk through it, or just as a reminder or refresher for teachings or learning you've had in the past. And maybe you'll learn something new, maybe you won't, or maybe you'll see something I got really wrong, and you can let me know on how I can improve it for future versions. So how do you find it? Well, you go to my wonderful website, pragmaticshift.com. There's a link in the description. And you go to a way to start using Scrum. You can read my little thing here. Again, importantly, it is a way. There's so many ways to start using Scrum. This is just one of them. It might not even be the best one, but if you want to get started and you're not sure how, why not give it a go? Additionally, as you use this, feel free to share it, ignore it, learn from it, use it to your heart's content. And I would love to hear from you. You can see a link here to our email, and it would really, really help me if I can find better ways of helping you, essentially. And that you can get a free PDF by clicking this little button down here. Wonderful, 100% downloaded. Now, I've created one earlier, so I'm going to open it in Foxit PDF Reader just so it's a bit easier to read. And this is what it looks like. This is the big picture with everything covered. You've got the overall journey right here, numbered, etc. You've got a little legend with some useful kind of reference information at the bottom as well. Now, of course, this is all inspired by the Scrum Guide and my own experience of using it. So some of it is abbreviated, some of it is nearly word for word, but ultimately you can use this information to your heart's content. It's entirely up to you. But I would love it if you credited me, if you're sharing this with others, and if you're learning from it, hopefully you just enjoy using it. Now, let's talk through it. So, how would you start using Scrum? Well, first of all, we need someone with a problem, right? Or a need that has to be resolved. And we tend to call those people the stakeholders. They're beautiful, they're amazing, we love them. And it's usually where we start. Once we have a problem, well, we need a product owner to own that problem and identify it as a problem that could probably do with Scrum to figure out. And they would take that on and take on the accountability of being a product owner. Once they've done that, and it might be one of the stakeholders, it might be someone external, it might be someone internal to the business. It depends on your own context. The product owner would then create the product goal, right? The mountaintop we're trying to climb together. Usually, they would create that together with the stakeholders. Now, the stakeholders would have input to this. They would feed into it. It is, after all, for them that we are creating this thing. So there's a good chance. However, the product owner does have final say because they are taking on that accountability of achieving this product goal together with the Scrum team. Once we have a product goal, we can now start thinking about what needs to happen, what outcomes need to be true for us to reach the product goal. And that would be the product backlog. So again, the product owner starts creating that product backlog just at a high level. Doesn't need to be super detailed yet, just enough to get started. And again, they might work with the stakeholders as they start figuring this out. And I like to think of the product backlog as our current best guess what is needed to reach the product goal. Now, once they have a product backlog in place, again, at least a rough one, they can start thinking about the skill sets needed to deliver it. And once we know the skill sets, well, then the product owner can start inviting our beautiful and amazing developers. The developers can then work together with the product owner stakeholders to understand the state of the product backlog. Do they have the right skill sets? Do they need different developers, more developers, maybe less developers? Who better than the people who are supposed to be doing the work themselves than to identify what skills are or are not required? And they continue working with the product owner to figure that out. Now that we have a product owner and developers, well, guess what? We need a true leader, right? A true leader that serves the team and enabling them and really taking on that accountability for getting Scrum up and running as intended, right? As described in the Scrum Guide. So they find a Scrum Master, maybe it's one of the developers who takes on that accountability, maybe it's the product owner. Ideally, we prefer it if you have a focused accountability, so either product owner or developer or Scrum Master, but you can wear multiple hats in Scrum should you need to. But we like to say the developers, together with the product owner, invite the person they think would make a good Scrum Master, and they would then again take on that accountability for the Scrum team. The Scrum team is now in place, now that we have all three accountabilities present and accounted for. The product owner, developers, and Scrum Master for the Scrum team who are accountable together for doing the work of getting to the product goal and getting a done increment delivered every sprint. But before they can start working on it, there's still a few pieces we need to line up, which is the definition of done, right? We're going to be doing this complex work where we're not really sure where the finishing line is, so we should put some definition in place for the quality criteria and business guidance. Now, this might be kind of grandfathered in, shall we say, kind of given to the Scrum team by the organization they're working for. If they have some of those standards, they could be engineering standards, design standards, compliance, risk, etc. Or if they don't have them, they would create it on their own. If it is provided by the organization, the Scrum team can always add to it. They can make it better. They can't make it worse, however, but they can improve the definition of done as provided by the organization. Now that they know where the finishing line is for any individual work item, they can start refining the product backlog a bit more during product backlog refinement. And again, the Scrum team works together, maybe even with the stakeholders, to refine some items to a state of readiness, where we can consider a product backlog item a PBI ready. Ready just means it fits within a sprint, or rather we think it fits within the sprint. It is after all complex work, so we don't know for sure. And I even like to say fits easily within a sprint, we think. Once we have enough stuff that is ready in the product backlog, we can start figuring out the sprint itself, and we're almost ready to start doing Scrum. What we need to figure out now is, first of all, what sprint duration do we want? And that's usually a kind of consideration between the product owner and developers. The product owner wants less risk, so they would usually have a bias for shorter sprints, and the developers need enough time to get something significant done each sprint, so they tend to want a slightly longer sprint. And it's finding the balance between the two of how much risk do we want to take on and being able to get something significant done each sprint. I'd say it's the difference between a slice of bread and a loaf of bread, right? Our stakeholders would like a loaf of bread, not just a slice of bread. And the Scrum Master is, of course, involved in terms of facilitating that conversation and maybe even having some opinions of their own. Who knows? Once they figure out the sprint length, right, the time box of the sprint itself, now they need to understand and agree how long they want each of the other Scrum events to be. The sprint planning, the daily Scrums, well, the daily Scrum is a maximum of 15 anyway, the sprint review and the sprint retrospective. And also when they fall within the sprint, does it fall, all on the same day, on 2 different days, what time of the week, what time of the day, etc., etc. Once they've agreed these things, they can then start their first sprint with sprint planning. And now we're doing Scrum, right? Now we're off to the races. So this team then starts by inspecting the product goal and the product backlog and agreeing on a sprint goal. Usually the product owner comes in with an idea of where they think we should be heading. The Scrum team then discusses this together. It's a collaborative, not combative conversation about how can they maximize the value towards that goal within the confines of the sprint. Once they've agreed on a sprint goal, they start adding in the product backlog items to the sprint backlog that they think are needed to get there. Now, who does this? Well, it's the developers. The developers are the ones who own the sprint backlog, right? The sprint goal is the commitment for the developers for the sprint, which is agreed together as a Scrum team. But once that is agreed as a Scrum team, the developers create the rest of the sprint backlog. So the items that go within the the sprint backlog to achieve the sprint goal. And then they may also create a plan by breaking it down further into tasks or something like that for how they're going to achieve that work within the sprint. I always say if it's a 1 week or more sprint, do the plan for at least 2 to 3 days ahead. May not be worth doing it for the full sprint because chances are it's going to change anyway. So a high level plan for the sprint is good, but you don't have to go into super detail until you start actually consuming the work. Once the Scrum team has agreed to the sprint goal, the developers have created the sprint backlog, we are done with sprint planning. Sprint planning is time boxed to 8 hours or less for a 1 month sprint. The sprint is time boxed itself to a 1 month sprint or less. And once we've got that all lined up, the Scrum team can get on with the work. Now the developers will get together once every day in the daily Scrum to inspect and adapt their progress towards the sprint goal in creating a new actionable plan for the next day, the next 24 hours, however we want to talk about it. And chances are they'll inspect their progress towards the sprint goal and adapt the sprint backlog as a result. And they'll keep doing this over and over again throughout the whole sprint, once a day at least. That's daily Scrum. And at any point as they're doing this work, they may develop and deliver an increment. An increment is born once the first product backlog item meets the definition of done. It is then ready to be released and shared at the sprint review. The product owner can release an increment at any given point, which is a very powerful thing, but also a very scary thing. Multiple increments can be created throughout the sprint. However, once the first increment is created, any subsequent increments need to not just meet the definition of done, but also need to be successfully integrated with the existing increment without breaking it, which probably means that any work you've done before in the increment needs to meet the definition of done again once you put them all together. At the end of the sprint then, we get to the sprint review. This is where the Scrum team and the stakeholders get together in a working session to inspect the sprint, the outcomes, and collaborate on what to do next. The team then inspects the sprint and agree on adaptations to improve their interactions and processes and tools, including the use of Scrum in the sprint retrospective. Now, the sprint review is the Scrum team and the stakeholders. It's a collaborative working session. I like to say if your stakeholders aren't leaving tired, you haven't done it correctly, right? You want discussion, you want some collaboration, you want a little bit of back and forth. If they're only happy and clapping and joyous all the time, maybe we're not pushing it hard enough, right? Maybe we need to be a bit riskier. Maybe we need to take on a bit more and see what we can get to. Or you're just very lucky, one of the two. But definitely keep an eye out for that. Ultimately, in the sprint review, we inspect the outcomes of the sprint, the increment, the sprint goal, etc. And then, together with the stakeholders, we discuss where we want to go next, and the product owner then adapts this product backlog based on that feedback. In the sprint retrospective, which is time boxed to 3 hours or less for a 1 month sprint, the Scrum team, and it's the Scrum team only, inspects the sprint itself, all the interactions, tools, processes, etc. that went into it, and they agree on adaptations to those processes, to how they work together as a Scrum team for how they can do even better the next time around. Once they've done that, it goes back around to sprint planning, and you're off to the races. And at this point, you're not just doing Scrum, you have done Scrum for a full sprint. And now it's just continuing that beautiful, beautiful process, that beautiful, beautiful framework of Scrum until you reach your product goal. It's time to pivot past a different product. You find something that works even better than Scrum. Or maybe you've just run out of budget and you can't keep going. Whichever happens first. And that's really it. Other than that, in the legend, just to talk you through it very quickly, you've got the 5 events, some of the good things to keep in mind, the time boxes, what we inspect, what we adapt, and who attends. The different commitments that we have for the artifacts, who creates that commitment, who's accountable for creating it, the artifact itself, that is, and what are some of the qualities we want to see in each of these increments. And of course, the 3 accountabilities and the Scrum team. What are their accountabilities, and what should we keep in mind for each of them? And that is about it. So again, thank you so much for watching so far. If this is something you think was useful to you, please let me know. If there's anything else you'd like to see me create or put together, again, do let me know. I'd love to see what else I can cover, what else I can create for you, just to make your journey better and to help you succeed. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much for watching. You take care.